Hello and welcome to the Kroll Emerging Threats Weekly podcast. My name is Mark Messer and I'm joined by Jeffrey Dang and Sam Flint. We are going to be covering Emerging Threats Weekly, and this was presented on the 11th of May, 2026 with an intelligence cutoff date of Friday, May the 8th, 2026. I will be covering the Canvas security incident. Sam will be covering the Code of Conduct AI in the Middle campaign, as well as copy fail. Jeff will be covering the China-Nexus UAT 8302 expanded government targeting. And then following that, I will be covering venomous helper phishing, as well as Ollama's Windows auto updater flaws. The Canvas security event, Canvas, the learning management system operated by Instructure and widely used by schools, universities, and other education providers, is the subject of an ongoing cyber extortion campaign. Public reporting attributes the activity to SHINYHUNTERS, a data extortion group that has claimed access to large volumes of Canvas-related user data. The incident appears to have two dimensions for impact: data exposure and service disruption. Instructure had already disclosed a cybersecurity incident involving Canvas user information and messages, and more recent reporting says attackers exploited a vulnerability to deface Canvas login portals across hundreds of institutions. Operationally, the impact has been material because the disruption occurred during finals and end-of-term activity for many institutions. Canvas is used for coursework, grades, lecture materials, assignments, and student-faculty communication, making loss of availability a direct business continuity issue for affected schools. Based on Instructure's investigation so far, the issue is linked to free-for-teacher accounts, which have been temporarily shut down while additional safeguards are implemented. Instructure says data taken in the April 29th incident included some personal information for users at affected organizations: names, email addresses, student ID numbers, and messages among Canvas users. It says it has found no evidence that passwords, date of birth, government identifiers, or financial information were involved, and no evidence so far that data was taken during the May 7th activity. Instructure states that Canvas is now fully back online and available for use, and that its external forensic partner found no evidence that the threat actor currently has access to the platform. Impacted organizations were notified on May 5th, 2026, and Instructure says affected organizations should rely on direct outreach rather than third-party lists or social media claims. Recommendations are to engage Instructure to confirm any impact to your institution, enforce multi-factor authentication for privileged users, and review single sign-on logs for anomalous activity. Review all Canvas activity integrations such as API keys, LTI, OAuth, and service accounts, and rotate credentials as needed. Retain any relevant logs across systems for investigation, as well as directing all users to access Canvas only via official links and to avoid any unsolicited emails and report suspicious activity immediately. Thank you, and next to Sam to cover Code of Conduct and AI in the Middle campaign.
Thanks a lot, Mark. This week, Microsoft disclosed a highly coordinated, short-duration phishing campaign that hit more than 35,000 users across 13,000 organizations in just a 2-day window. The campaign relied on adversary-in-the-middle phishing rather than simple credential harvesting. Victims were first lured with an internal compliance and code of conduct notice, then passed through multiple staging layers, including capture challenges, before reaching a Microsoft sign-in page controlled by the attacker. That flow enabled real-time interception of authentication traffic and session tokens, meaning accounts could be taken over even when MFA was enabled if it wasn't phishing resistant. From an operational perspective, the campaign stood out for its high level of maturity, using legitimate email infrastructure, enterprise branding, target-specific phrasing, and a poor box encryption banner to reinforce credibility, particularly in the healthcare sector when it's commonly seen. The key takeaway for organizations is that awareness training alone is no longer sufficient. This type of token theft leads to immediate account access, making phishing-resistant MFA, strong email protections, and identity monitoring critical for protecting cloud identities. Security teams should also make sure safe links and safe attachments are enabled, use post-delivery remediation, and actively hunt for malicious sender domains, attachment hashes, and signs of token misuse. The campaign also highlights the importance of monitoring for impossible travel and unfamiliar sign-in properties in protecting high-value Microsoft 365 accounts. Our third item this week is CVE 2026-31431, dubbed copy fail. It's worth noting, I think, that there was a debate within the team as to whether to include this story. On paper, it's a local privilege-escalation vulnerability with a CVSS of 7.8, which is not remotely exploitable, which would normally keep it out of our weekly. But the amount of attention it's received in the press, paired with some of the more dramatic headlines, made it clear that many organizations want some clarity on the practical risk to their environments. Copy fail affects all major Linux kernels built since 2017 and allows any authenticated local user to escalate directly to root. While it's not remotely exploitable, once an attacker gains local execution, the escalation path is reliable and works consistently across distributions, which increases its relevance in shared or multi-user environments. Although vendors have issued patches, a working proof of concept exploit was released within 24 hours of disclosure, underlining a familiar pattern in which newly disclosed vulnerabilities are quickly operationalized once technical details become public. Since then, we've seen a rise in copycat and poorly written AI-generated exploit code, which has added noise for defenders and made it harder to distinguish functional exploit paths from non-working or incomplete examples during testing. Where this vulnerability becomes more meaningful is in containerized and CI/CD environments. A compromised container, build job, or low-privileged user account can be used as a straightforward path to host-level root access, making copy fail a useful escalation step in post-compromise activity and potentially in broader supply chain attack scenarios targeting shared Linux infrastructure. For organizations, this is best viewed as an escalation control issue rather than a standalone Linux bug. Patching should be prioritized, particularly on exposed and multi-user systems, and local shell access reduced where possible. Teams should also monitor for signs of privilege escalation, including abnormal pseudo usage and post-compromise tooling, and treat public proof of concept code with caution by validating it only in controlled environments. Back to you, Mark.
Thank you, Sam. And next we're going over to Jeffrey Dang to discuss UAT 8302.
Hi, Cisco Talos disclosed UAT 8302 as a China-Nexus advanced persistent threat group that has been targeting government entities in South America since late 2024. The activity expanded in 2025 to include government agencies in Southeastern Europe. So far, the group's objective is to maintain long-term access to government and public adjacent organizations, essentially supply lines. Post-compromise activity shows a strong focus on environment mapping and credential access. It's reported that a large malware ecosystem tied to these operations, including NetDraft, CloudSourcer, VShell, Snowlight, and RustDust. A key finding is the operational overlap with tooling previously linked to other China-connected clusters. For targeted organizations, the main risk is not a single new malware family, but the actor's ability to combine multiple loaders, backdoors, proxy tools, and legitimate services to maintain persistent access. The use of scheduled tasks, sideloading, proxy infrastructure, and cloud-based command channels allow for activity to blend into normal everyday operations for these organizations. Recommendations include monitoring and reviewing directory, bulk log access, and credential extraction behavior. Review scheduled tasks for unusual behavior or VPN tooling. Prioritize patching and hardening of exposed government-facing systems, and hunt for hashes, domains, IPs, and file names associated with past artifacts. Handing it back to you, Mark.
Thank you, Jeff. Next, we're going to discuss the venomous helper phishing used in legitimate remote access tools for durability, particularly the fact that it was used in tandem. Securonix reports that the ongoing venomous helper campaign has affected more than 80 organizations, most of which are in the United States. The operation appears to be using phishing as the entry point and legitimate remote monitoring and management software as the persistence mechanism, as well as for command and control. This activity is impersonating the U.S. Social Security Administration and directs users to download what appears to be a Social Security statement. Behind the lure is a chain involving compromised websites, a package Windows executable, installation of simple help as a service, safe mode persistence, watchdog-based self-restart logic, and later deployment of ConnectWise Screen Connect as a backup access path. Securonix assessed the dual use of simple help and Screen Connect as a deliberate, redundant dual-chain access architecture. This essentially makes the campaign especially relevant to ransomware and initial access operations because defenders may remove one tool while the second path remains available to the operator. Standard antivirus and signature-based controls can miss this activity because the installed software is legitimate and signed. Once established, the operator can remotely access the desktop, transfer files, and pivot without dropping traditional commodity malware first. This campaign reflects a mature initial access model built around admin tooling rather than obviously malicious binaries. Organizations that still treat remote management and monitoring software as inherently trusted are leaving a blind spot that financially motivated operators will continue to exploit. Recommendations are to audit approved remote management and monitoring tools and block unauthorized installations of Simple Help and Screen Connect, as well as general application allow listing. Monitoring new services, safe mode persistence changes in remote desktop sessions as well, and investigating any phishing that is observed, particularly educating users on social security themed phishing lures and downloads from compromised third-party sites. Next, we will be covering the Ollama Windows auto updater flaws that can be chained into persistent code execution. This is involving CVE 2026-42248 and CVE 2026-42249. Striga Research describes two vulnerabilities in Ollama's Windows auto updater that can be chained to plant a persistent executable that runs on every login. These issues affect Ollama's Windows update path and are tracked as CVE 2026-42248 and CVE 2026-42249. They say that the first flaw is a signature verification routine that is called but effectively does nothing, allowing downloaded content to be executed without meaningful validation. The second is a path traversal issue in the updater's handling of HTTP response headers, enabling a malicious ETAG value to write an arbitrary executable into the user's startup folder. Because the unsigned file is not cleaned up and lands in startup without a mark of the web tag, the result can be persistence with execution on the next login, with software increasingly used to run local large language models on developer and knowledge worker endpoints. For organizations adopting local AI tooling, the risk is compounded by the fact that such tools often run on systems that handle proprietary data, local model assets, and developer secrets. Updater security in this context is part of endpoint trust and not just application hygiene. Security teams should inventory where local AI tooling is installed and confirm that update channels are subject to the same scrutiny as other enterprise software distribution mechanisms. Recommendations are to identify Windows systems running Ollama and apply vendor fixes as they become available, restrict outbound updater traffic to trusted infrastructure, and inspect unusual update responses. Monitor Windows startup folders and updater execution paths for unexpected new binaries, and including local AI tooling in your software inventory, hardening, and application control programs. And thank you. That is all that we are covering for today. Let us know if you have any questions.